my name is Dino. It's on the article Living with a Computer by James Fallows. What's the focus of this video? It's going to get into the beginning of the popular computing era by looking at some choice parts of Fallows' article. What is the significance with respect to computers? Oh, sorry. This is going to deal with the significance of computers. It kind of gets into my sort of overall idea is the long omnipresence of increasingly portable devices in our lives. When I say our, I mean members of this class. You're probably watching this. You might be one of my class members or a student these days. It's maybe not as applicable for people who are a little bit older, maybe our parents or grandparents, because some people have lived long enough where computers weren't, and these types of devices weren't an integral part of their daily lives, like especially our grandparents. Well, I think our parents, like depending on their age, unless they're like super old, this probably also applies to them just to some extent. I can talk first about the idea of writing with computers. I had a prompt before, which object is this quote referred to, in the word computer is blanked out, but given that this article is about computers, you'd probably figure it out that way. Here's a quote from Fallows. Quote, "When I sit down to write a letter or start the first draft of an article, I simply type on the keyboard and the words appear on the screen. For 6 months, I found it awkward to compose first drafts on the computer." So basically, this article goes back into sort of the Fallows' first integration with the computer in 1982. And back in those days, computers were such not known devices that Fallows and the team of editors he worked with would have needed to introduce what computers were. So something as simple as writing a letter or writing the first draft of an article or an essay, that was so foreign they had to sort of walk people through it. So when was this written? As you can probably figure out, it was written in 1982. Given the quotation I added, that's over but 40 years ago. As a result, it's over 40 years ago. As a result, you see how short a period of time that was. Like, so 40 years ago, like say if you're watching this in the early 2020s, people just didn't even know what computers were. Like, just, what does it do? Well, you type on a keyboard and words appear on a screen. What? So that's how rudimentary and how non-immersed they were in modern society. Some of the initial uses. This is again Fallows reflecting on his use of the computer. My thoughts often drifted to the advertisements I had seen in airline magazines, in which trim and cheerful secretaries effortlessly produce documents by typing in front of computer screens. Were these devices real? First off, obviously it seems really. This is again back in the 80s, early 80s, when sort of the wording for this seems a little bit sexist, presuming that at that time many of the people who were secretaries were women, and just like the sort of the description of them. But the sort of the really key part is were these devices real? And it's like they were so new and so seminal. Like just the idea of typing on something on a keyboard and words appearing on a screen was something that seemed not real and somewhat magical. This is another quote, another talk about some of the uses, and this is Fallows again, sort of talking about how to use the computers. The process works this way. When I sit down to write a letter or start the first draft of an article, I simply type on the keyboard and the words appear on the screen. Again, this is so new. And this was written for The Atlantic, which is like normally the readership is relatively sophisticated. He has to explain the process of writing on a computer. That's how, in 82, how little they were known. Another quote, the second element in my system was the monitor, a 12-inch TV screen. So this is even before monitors. Some monitors are like black and white TVs. Mine, which oddly enough was produced by the same company, Ball Corporation, that makes home canning supplies, displays light green letters against background of dark green and is supposed to be easier in the eyes. So a couple things from this: 12-inch screen for those of you who are lucky enough to have like a decent sized monitor. 12-inch screen seems ridiculous. Typing on a TV seems ridiculous. Typing on a somewhat black and white monitor or a light green on dark green, ridiculous. And then also it talks about this is this whole industry is such an infancy that the Ball Corporation, which may still be around making home canning supplies, I'm sure some of you have them in your basements or whatever for your canned goods. It's so consolidated that it's done by major corporations, Samsung, LG, Sony, etc., Apple, so that now, again, over the 40 years, there's been this consolidation. You don't have as many niche players as you once did, so there's a bunch of changes already. Finally, I'm getting close to the end of this. What is the importance of this, of me showing this article, and why would I talk about this? Why would I write this or create this video? Why would I want to share it with you? Why would I share the text in a class? In the past, 40 years ago, computers were largely unknown. I think people had heard of them, but they didn't really know about them. They probably heard about the larger ones that are used by corporations with all the tapes spinning around. And they're super huge and taking up rooms. At that time, right as they were transitioning to become popular, they were unknown, somewhat magical devices. As Fallows writes, were these devices real? Like, they seemed somewhat magical. At present today in the early 2020s, computers, depending on what you do, like if you're a student these days in the 2020s, it's indispensable. Like you almost can't get away from it. Like I don't know how you'd be, especially at the collegiate and upward level. Maybe in high school, you could get away with it and not have one. Maybe like your school could take some kind of accommodation. But if you're at the collegiate level, I don't know how someone would say you have to have a computer to access your grades, to log into classes, to submit assignments. It's almost like I just don't know how you can get away from it. And then also, not even just for those people, but almost everyone else. Just need some kind of computer or computing device like a smartphone. And in terms of the future, I leave a question mark. Who really knows? But you have to make the bet if you had to, or I'd make the bet. They're only to become more ubiquitous and more indispensable for our lives. And I'll leave you some questions for reflection, which I shared towards the end of the last part. Could you work today or even live today without a computer or a device? Like, could you be a fully functioning member of society without a computer or a smartphone? Could you work? Could you have a real job, and without even the most rudimentary computer skills? Again, could you have a personal life today? What is the broad implications of this ubiquity and this indispensability? Like, what has it wrought on our society? That's something that if for students who study with me, we spend a lot of time sort of thinking about that as a sort of a contextual question. And finally, how will our future be further impacted? Like, if they're largely ubiquitous, largely indispensable, largely necessary for our work, largely less necessary for our lives, and they're only to become more pervasive and used in more micro ways, used within this the context of AI, etc., how will our future be further impacted? Like, is it even almost possible for many of you to imagine, like, once you have your laptop, and once you have a phone, and maybe you might have a smartwatch, etc., the smaller trinkets that are a bit more disposable, maybe a tablet. Like, you have so many things already accessible to you. Most of you have them. If you're watching this video, you're most likely watching on a phone or on a laptop or a desktop or a tablet. Like how much further could we be impacted, given that they're almost completely ubiquitous and completely indispensable today, let alone as it will be in the future. That was Living with the Computer by James Fallows. Please feel free to like this video. Please feel free to comment on it. How often do you use a computer? How often do you use a laptop, desktop, tablet, phone? Could you imagine your life, your work life, your personal life without one? What do you think about the idea that computers were literally almost non-existent in personal spaces 40 years ago, and now they're completely ubiquitous? What are the next 40 years going to look like? And finally, please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you like this type of content. As always, thanks for watching. Take care.